The Sunday afternoon sun streamed through the living room window of their modest home, casting warm shadows on the faded brown walls. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, doing little to combat the heat that pressed in from all sides. On the worn but clean sofa, three women huddled together over a leather-bound photo album, its corners frayed from years of handling. "Look at this one," Jemima said, her finger touching a photograph so gently as if it might crumble under her touch. In the picture, their father stood proudly in front of his shop at Balogun Market. His white shirt crisp despite the market's notorious dust, his smile wide beneath his neat mustache. "Remember how Papa would always wear this same white shirt for any important occasion?" Jennifer leaned in closer, her shoulder brushing against their mother's arm. "And he would tell everyone it was his lucky shirt," she added, her voice carrying a hint of laughter that didn't quite reach her eyes. At 24, Jennifer was the prettier of the two sisters, something strangers never failed to mention. Her skin glowed with expensive moisturizers she claimed were gifts from school friends, and her braids were always freshly done, unlike Jemima's simple hairdo. Between them, Stella sat with the quiet dignity of a woman who had carried her grief like a hidden purse, close to her body but never on display. 6 years of widowhood had left their mark. Strands of gray peeked through her black hair, and fine lines had etched themselves around her eyes. Still, she maintained the posture of the beautiful wife she had once been, before life had demanded she become merely a market woman. "Your father," Stella began, running her fingers over the plastic covering the photograph. "He had just paid off the loan for the second shop when this picture was taken." Her voice caught slightly, and Jemima quickly squeezed her mother's hand. The aroma of jollof rice wafted in from the kitchen, where their Sunday lunch simmered on the stove. It was Jemima who had prepared it, just as she did every Sunday, following their father's recipe to the letter. Even now, at 28, with a fiancé and plans for her own home, she maintained this tradition. The spices and ingredients cost more these days, but she never complained about the expense, just as she never complained about the long hours she spent running what remained of their father's business. "Oh," Jennifer suddenly exclaimed, flipping to another page. "Here's the one from my secondary school graduation." The photograph showed a younger Jennifer in her green uniform, flanked by both sisters and their parents. Their father's lucky white shirt was there again, but this time he sat in a wheelchair, his smile weak but present. It was the last family photo they would take together. Jemima felt the familiar tightness in her chest as she looked at the image. That day, she had already been helping at the shop, learning the business instead of pursuing her dream of law school. She remembered how proud their father had been of Jennifer's scores, even as the cancer ate away at his strength. "You were always the smart one," Jemima said softly, meaning it as a compliment, though something flickered in Jennifer's expression. Too quick to catch, a pot clattered in the kitchen, breaking the moment. "The rice!" Jemima jumped up, her wrapper swishing around her ankles as she rushed to save their lunch. As she stirred the pot, adding a little water to prevent burning, she could hear her sister's laugh floating in from the living room, that musical sound that everyone loved. "Jemima," her mother called out, "leave the food for a minute. Come see this picture of you and Kenneth at your engagement ceremony." Jemima smiled to herself, thinking of her fiancé. In 2 months, they would begin picking out colors for their wedding. Kenneth was everything she had prayed for: kind, successful, and so loving. Just last week, he had surprised her at the shop with lunch, earning approving nods from the market women who had watched her grow up. As she walked back to join her family, Jemima caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror hanging by the kitchen door. She saw what everyone else saw: the responsible one, the plain one, the one who had sacrificed. But today, with the smell of her father's jollof rice recipe filling the house and her wedding plans taking shape, she felt beautiful too. She didn't notice how Jennifer's eyes followed her movement, didn't see the way her sister's fingers tensed slightly when the engagement photo was mentioned, didn't catch the flash of something dark and hungry in her sister's expression. In the gentle Sunday afternoon light, some shadows remained hidden, biding their time. 6 years earlier, on a busy Tuesday morning at Balogun Market, everything changed. The day had started like any other. Stephen had opened his shop early, arranging the newest shipment of imported fabrics in rainbow rose that caught the morning sun. He was known for having the best selection of lace materials in the market, and his eye for quality had built him a loyal customer base over 20 years. That morning, he had called Jemima, asking her to bring his blood pressure medicine which he'd forgotten at home. "Hurry, my daughter," he'd said, his voice cheerful as always. "Chief Adamola's wife is coming to pick materials for her daughter's wedding, and you know how she loves to bargain." Jemima had rushed from their house, the small bottle of pills clutched in her hand, her wrapper hastily tied over her nightgown. But Lagos traffic had no mercy. The Okada rider she'd hired weaved through the gridlocked cars with death-defying skill, but even he couldn't make miracles happen. By the time she reached the shop, market women were wailing, and her father lay still on the floor, his lucky white shirt no longer crisp, his face peaceful, as if he just decided to take a nap between sales. The heart attack had been quick, the doctors said later. There was nothing anyone could have done. But Jemima carried the weight of those trapped minutes in traffic like stones in her pocket, pulling her down every time she thought about them. At home, Stella had collapsed into herself, her posture crumbling under the weight of sudden widowhood. Jennifer, in her final year at secondary school, had watched with teenage bewilderment as their comfortable life began to unravel. The whispers started almost immediately, relatives wondering how Stella would manage, neighbors clucking their tongues at the sight of the once proud family's gradual descent into mere survival. That was when Jemima made her choice. The acceptance letter from Lagos State University's law faculty lay unopened on her desk as she took over her father's shop. "It's just for a while," she told herself, "until Mama finds her feet again." She learned the business with the same determination she'd once applied to her studies. Which supplier gave the best prices for Swiss lace, how to spot fake designer brands, when to extend credit and when to stand firm, these became her lessons instead of contract law and constitutional rights. Jennifer continued her education, entering university to study business administration. "At least one of us should finish school," Jemima would say, smiling as she handed over money for textbooks and fees. She didn't see how Jennifer's friends at university looked down at her sister's market woman status, didn't know how Jennifer sometimes pretended Jemima was a distant cousin rather than her sister when classmates visited. The regular customers loved Jemima. "Just like your father," they would say, as she helped them select materials, her fingers running expertly over the fabrics, explaining the differences in quality and price. He would be so proud. They didn't see how each compliment was a small knife in Jennifer's heart, twisting deeper every time someone praised her sister's sacrifice. At night, after the shop closed, Jemima would sit with their mother, going over the books, figuring out how to stretch their income to cover Jennifer's education, the rent, and the ever-rising cost of living in Lagos. Sometimes, she would catch her mother staring at their father's picture on the wall, and they would both pretend not to see each other's tears. The second shop, smaller but in a good location, was supposed to be their safety net. Stephen had bought it just before his death, seeing it as an investment in his daughter's future. "When both shops are doing well," he used to say, "there will be enough for everyone's dreams." But dreams, like the Lagos weather, have a way of changing without warning. Unknown to Jemima, who spent her days surrounded by other people's wedding laces and celebration fabrics, Jennifer was nursing a different kind of dream, one that would cost far more than money. In the quiet corners of their lives, between the customer haggling and the family dinners, between the proud smiles and the hidden tears, a seed of resentment had taken root in the younger sister's heart. It grew in the shadow of Jemima's sacrifice, watered by every praise of her sister's goodness, fertilized by every reminder of what their family had lost and what they had become. The ghost of their father's lucky white shirt still hung in his closet, preserved by Stella like a relic of better days. But luck, like fabric, can wear thin with time, and some tears are too deep to mend. The aroma of expensive perfume mixed with the steam rising from hot pepper soup as Kenneth sat at the dining table in the family's home. It was his first time meeting Jennifer, who had been away at her friend's place during his previous visits. The dining room hummed with the sound of the air conditioner he had bought for the family last Christmas, a gesture that had made Stella praise him endlessly as the son she never had. Jemima watched proudly as her fiancé entertained everyone with stories from the bank where he worked as an executive. His perfectly tailored suit and gold cufflinks spoke of his success, but it was his humble manner that had first drawn her to him 2 years ago when they met at a customer's wedding. Now at 30, he represented everything she had dreamed of: stability, respect, and a love that felt as solid as the diamond ring on her finger. "So, Jennifer," Kenneth said, turning his attention to the younger sister, "Jemima tells me you're finishing your business administration degree soon?" His voice carried the polished accent of someone educated in private schools, matching Jennifer's own carefully cultivated manner of speaking. Jennifer dabbed her lips with a napkin before responding, her movements graceful and practiced. "Yes, final year, though I'm more interested in fashion marketing than traditional business." Her eyes met his briefly, and something electric passed between them, quick as Lagos lightning during the rainy season. "Fashion marketing? You should talk to my friend at Sterling Bank who handles luxury brand accounts," Kenneth offered, leaning forward slightly. "I could introduce you." Jemima beamed at the exchange, happy to see her fiancé taking an interest in her sister's future. She didn't notice how Jennifer's fingers lingered when accepting Kenneth's business card, or how his eyes followed her sister's movement as she walked to the kitchen to help their mother with dessert. That dinner marked the beginning of what Jennifer would later call fate in her secret diary, though fate had little to do with the calculated text messages she began sending to her future brother-in-law. "Just had a question about that banking contact," the first one read, sent late one evening when she knew Jemima would be busy closing up the shop. Their first private meeting happened at Café Neo, far from the bustling markets and familiar faces of their neighborhood. "It's better to discuss business opportunities without distractions," Kenneth had suggested, and Jennifer had agreed, wearing her most expensive dress, bought with money from the secret sale she had orchestrated. They sat in a corner table, their heads bent close together over cups of overpriced coffee. What started as career mentorship soon shifted to personal conversations, shared jokes, and lingering glances. Jennifer discovered that Kenneth shared her love for foreign movies, unlike Jemima, who preferred local Nollywood films. He understood her ambitions for a life beyond the market, beyond the constant reminder of their father's death and their family's struggles. "Sometimes I feel like no one sees the real me," Jennifer confessed during their third secret meeting, this time at a rooftop restaurant in Victoria Island. "They only see Jemima's little sister." Kenneth reached across the table, his hand covering hers. He should have pulled away, should have remembered the ring in his pocket, chosen for Jemima's finger. Instead, he let his thumb trace small circles on Jennifer's palm. "I see you," he said softly. The guilt came in waves for both of them. Kenneth would bring Jemima extra gifts, a new phone, jewelry, even a small generator for the shop. Jennifer would help her sister more at home, cooking dinner and washing clothes, as if domestic devotion could balance her growing emotional betrayal. Their secret meetings became more frequent, hidden behind elaborate lies. "Late meetings at the bank," Kenneth would tell Jemima. "Group study sessions," Jennifer would claim to her mother. They chose places where they wouldn't be recognized. Small cafes in Lekki, hidden restaurants in Ikeja, once even a quiet beach in Badagry. The phone calls came late at night, whispered conversations about dreams and desires, about the suffocating weight of family expectations. "Your sister loves the idea of who I am," Kenneth told Jennifer one night, "but you understand the real me." Meanwhile, Jemima threw herself into wedding preparations, 8 months suddenly seeming too short to plan everything. She didn't question why Kenneth's work meetings had increased, or why Jennifer showed such enthusiasm for helping with wedding details. Love, like the Lagos sun, can sometimes blind you to the shadows it casts. One evening, as Jemima excitedly showed Jennifer the wedding invitation designs, her sister's phone buzzed with a message. Jennifer quickly turned it face down, but not before Jemima caught a glimpse of a heart emoji. "Do you have a boyfriend you're hiding from us?" she teased, happy at the thought of her sister finding love too. Jennifer forced a laugh, the sound hollow in her throat. "Just a friend," she said, thinking of how she and Kenneth had kissed in his car just hours earlier, the taste of his expensive cologne still lingering on her clothes. "You know me, focused on my studies." That night, in her bed, Jennifer stared at the ceiling fan spinning above her, its rhythmic movement matching the turbulent thoughts in her head. On her phone, a message from Kenneth glowed in the dark. "I can't stop thinking about you." Down the hall, she could hear Jemima talking on the phone, probably discussing more wedding plans, her happiness echoing through the thin walls like an accusation. The deception had taken on a life of its own, growing larger and more complex with each passing day. Like the many-layered fabrics in their father's shop, it was becoming impossible to see where one lie ended and another began. But unlike those fabrics, the price of this deception would be measured not in naira, but in shattered trust and broken hearts. Cynthia's bedroom in her parents' Surrey home became the command center for what she and Jennifer jokingly called Operation Freedom. Though there was nothing funny about the careful destruction of Jemima's reputation they planned there. The pink walls and fluffy pillows seemed at odds with the darkness of their schemes, laid out between plates of chicken and chips from Mr. Biggs and endless bottles of Malta Guinness. "It's really for her own good," Jennifer would say, trying to convince herself as much as Cynthia. "Jemima needs to learn she can't control everything and everyone." She sat cross-legged on Cynthia's bed, scrolling through her sister's phone, borrowed while Jemima was in the shower. Its password easily guessed, their father's birth year. Cynthia, who had been Jennifer's friend since university, nodded in agreement. "She's too strict with you anyway. Remember how she complained when you started staying out late for study group?" She made air quotes with her fingers, knowing those late nights had actually been spent with Kenneth. Their plan started small, like a tiny crack in a windscreen that slowly spreads. First came the edited screenshots of Jemima's text messages to Kenneth. Jennifer had learned to use a photo editing app that let her modify the timestamps and content. A simple, "Where are you?" from Jemima became a long paragraph of demanding questions. "I miss you," turned into jealous accusations. They sent these doctored screenshots to carefully chosen friends and family members, always under the guise of concern. "I'm worried about my sister," Jennifer would say, her voice perfectly modulated to show sisterly concern. "She's becoming so possessive of Kenneth. Do you think it's because of losing Papa?" The whispers began to circulate in their social circles. At church, women would watch Jemima with worried eyes, whispering behind their elaborate jealous. "It's always the quiet ones," they would say, clicking their tongues when Jemima would call Kenneth during Sunday service to check why he hadn't come. Then, the staged incidents. At a family friend's birthday party, Jennifer carefully orchestrated a scene where Kenneth was seated next to a pretty young banker. Following their plan, he engaged in animated conversation with the woman, while Jennifer made sure Jemima noticed. When Jemima naturally came over to join them, Jennifer was ready. "Stop embarrassing yourself," she hissed loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "He's just talking to a colleague. Why do you always have to make a scene?" Jemima had stood there, confused and hurt. "I didn't. I was just coming to say hello." But the damage was done. Guests had turned to watch, seeing exactly what Jennifer wanted them to see, a controlling, jealous woman unable to let her fiancé have a simple conversation. The rumors spread faster than fire in Harmattan season. Cynthia played her part perfectly, sharing concerns with their mother. "Auntie," she would say during her visits, her voice dripping with false worry, "has Jemima always been this way? My friend's sister had similar symptoms before they discovered she needed help." Stella began watching her older daughter with worried eyes. The strong, responsible child who had given up everything for their family was suddenly being painted as unstable. When Gemma would come home tired from the shop and snap at small irritations, her mother would exchange meaningful looks with Jennifer. "Perhaps you're working too hard," Stella suggested one evening, after Jemima had argued with Jennifer about using her face cream without asking. "My friend's daughter sees a very good therapist in Ikeja." The isolation grew like darkness after sunset. Blessing, Jemima's closest friend since secondary school, stopped answering her calls after receiving a lengthy voice note from Jennifer, detailing instances of Jemima's obsessive behavior. All carefully fabricated or exaggerated. "She's not the same person anymore," Jennifer told Blessing over lunch, wiping fake tears. "Yesterday, she went through Kenneth's phone while he was in the bathroom. She even accused him of cheating just because he works with female customers at the bank." The real tragedy was how easily everyone believed the lies. They forgot how Jemima had sacrificed her dreams to support her family. Instead, they saw what Jennifer wanted them to see: a woman cracking under the pressure of her approaching wedding, someone to pity and avoid. Even their elderly neighbor, Mama Dunny, who tried to speak up for Jemima, was dismissed. "That old woman is always poking her nose into other people's business," Jennifer told anyone who would listen. "She's probably going senile." Meanwhile, Kenneth played his part in the deception, appearing increasingly uncomfortable around Jemima in public. At family gatherings, he would arrive late and leave early, citing work pressures, but really meeting Jennifer at their usual hidden spots. When Jemima would call, he would answer on speakerphone, letting others hear her demanding tone, carefully provoked by his own distant behavior. The most devastating blow came during the wedding planning committee meeting at their local church. Jennifer had prepared for this moment carefully, planting seeds of doubt among the church women for weeks. When Jemima disagreed with the choir director's song selection, suggesting traditional hymns instead of contemporary worship songs, Jennifer was ready. "There she goes again," she announced to the room, her voice carrying just the right note of embarrassment. Always needing to control everything. Kenneth shouldn't have to deal with this. The room fell silent, the kind of heavy silence that carries judgment. Jemima looked around at the faces she had known since childhood, seeing not support but suspicion. In that moment, she felt more alone than ever, not knowing that her isolation was as carefully constructed as the elaborate wedding plans spread out on the table before her. That evening, as Jemima cried in her room, Jennifer met Cynthia at their usual spot. "It's working better than we planned," she said, sipping her Chapman. "Soon, everyone will see that I'm the better choice for Kenneth." But in the quiet moments, when the night pressed in and the weight of her actions became too heavy, Jennifer would look at old family photos. Her father in his lucky white shirt, Jemima helping her with homework, their mother braiding their hair on lazy Sundays. In these moments, doubt would creep in like a harmattan chill. But then she would remember Kenneth's touch, his promises of a grander life, and she would push the guilt away, telling herself that sometimes love requires sacrifice, even if the person being sacrificed is your own sister. The second shop stood on a busy corner of Balogun Market, smaller than their main store, but in a location that drew steady customer traffic. Its metal shutters still bore their father's name in fading blue paint, a reminder of Stephen's dreams for his family's future. It was here that Jennifer set her most ambitious plan in motion, on a humid Wednesday afternoon when the market hummed with activity. "Mama," she said, perching on a plastic chair in their mother's shop, while Jemima was busy across town with a bulk customer. "I've been thinking about Jemima's law school dreams." She watched her mother's face carefully, noting how Stella's hands stilled on the lace fabric she was folding. "What about it?" Stella asked, her voice carrying the weight of old guilt. They all knew how Jemima had sacrificed her education to keep the family afloat. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper despite the noisy market around them. "I heard her crying last night, looking at her old acceptance letter. She thinks we don't know she still keeps it." This was a lie. Jemima had long since made peace with her choices. But Jennifer had learned that the best manipulation started with a grain of truth wrapped in carefully crafted fiction. "She never complains," Stella murmured, more to herself than to Jennifer. Market women passed by their shop, calling out greetings that she barely acknowledged, lost in thoughts of her firstborn's sacrifices. "Papa's second shop," Jennifer continued, careful to keep her tone casual. "It's just sitting there, gathering rent money. But if we sold it—" She let the suggestion hang in the air like the heavy Lagos humidity. The idea took root in Stella's mind over the next few weeks, carefully nurtured by Jennifer's constant reminders. "Think how proud Papa would be, seeing Jemima finally become a lawyer," she would say over dinner. Or, "My friend's uncle is looking to buy property in this area. He's offering good money." What Stella didn't know was that Jennifer had already been spending far beyond her means. The designer bags she claimed were gifts from school friends, the expensive dinners with Kenneth in high-end restaurants, the hotels where they met in secret, all funded by credit cards and loans from friends, piling up like dark clouds before a storm. The sale happened quietly, handled by an agent Jennifer recommended, a friend of a friend who was willing to be discreet and creative with the paperwork. The price was good, though not as high as the property's true value. "The market is down," the agent explained smoothly, pocketing his inflated commission while Jennifer secured her own kickback. Stella signed the papers in their living room, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote away a piece of her husband's legacy. "It's for Jemima's future," she told herself, not seeing how Jennifer's eyes gleamed in triumph. The money came in 3 installments. Jennifer had suggested this arrangement, claiming it would help with tax purposes. In reality, it allowed her to divert funds more easily. "I'll handle the bank transactions, Mama," she offered. "You know, these online banking things can be confusing." While Jemima worked double shifts at their remaining shop, arriving home with aching feet and dreams no bigger than the next day's sales, Jennifer was orchestrating a different reality. The first installment went to clearing her debts and buying a new iPhone. "A gift from my coursemate's father," she explained when asked. The second payment funded more secret rendezvous with Kenneth, designer clothes that made her feel worthy of a bank executive's love, and strategic gifts to friends who kept their secret. She kept careful track of her lies in a small notebook, recording who knew what version of her stories. To some, the money came from an uncle abroad. To others, she had won a brand ambassadorship deal. The truth stretched and twisted like rubber bands, ready to snap back and leave marks. The third installment was meant for Jemima's law school fees, the supposed purpose of the entire sale. Jennifer had already planned how to handle that revelation. A tragic story about investment gone wrong, perhaps, or a fraudulent bank transaction. She would cry the right tears, show the right amount of distress. But the weight of the deception showed in unexpected ways. When Jemima would proudly tell customers about their father's vision for the 2 shops, Jennifer would suddenly find reasons to leave the room. During family prayers, when their mother thanked God for their father's provision through the shops, Jennifer would study her nail polish with intense concentration. One day, Jemima mentioned expanding the business to the second shop once she got married. "We could hire someone to manage it," she said excitedly over dinner. "The rent income is good, but imagine if we ran it ourselves again." Jennifer dropped her spoon, the clatter against the plate making everyone jump. "I'm not feeling well," she mumbled, rushing to the bathroom, where she was quietly sick, her body rejecting the weight of her lies as much as her dinner. The money flowed through her fingers like water in a drought, each naira spent trying to build a life she thought she deserved. Designer stores in Victoria Island knew her by name now. Hotel receptionists smiled knowingly when she checked in for her meetings with Kenneth. Her Instagram page bloomed with photos of a life that looked successful, but was built on the ashes of her sister's dreams. At night, sometimes she would walk past the spot where the second shop used to be, now transformed into a boutique selling Chinese imports. The faded blue paint of their father's name was gone, painted over in bright modern colors. She would stand there, remembering how proud their father had been when he bought this property, how he had taken them there as little girls, pointing out how the 2 shops would secure their future. "Sometimes we have to sacrifice the past for the future," she whispered to herself on these nights, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. But as she turned away from the transformed shop front, her phone would buzz with a message from Kenneth, and the guilt would fade under the warm glow of his attention. Meanwhile, in their remaining shop, Jemima continued to work, unaware that each day brought her closer to a truth that would shatter not just her dreams of law school, but her entire understanding of family loyalty. Loneliness grows like mold in the rainy season, slowly at first, then spreading until it covers everything. For Jemima, it began with small changes, so subtle she almost missed them at first. It started with the church women. After service one Sunday, she noticed how Sister Bisi, who had always stopped to chat about wedding plans, suddenly became engrossed in her phone when Jemima approached. Sister Funmi, who had promised to help with the wedding decorations, made a show of checking her watch and hurrying away. Even the church cleaner, who usually asked Jemima for advice about her daughter's education, now avoided eye contact. "Did I offend someone?" Jemima asked her mother after service, watching groups of women huddled in conversation, their voices dropping to whispers when she walked past. Stella shifted uncomfortably, her new wrapper rustling. "Perhaps you've been a bit intense about the wedding planning," she suggested carefully, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "Sister Bisi mentioned you were very particular about the choir selections." "I just wanted some traditional hymns," Jemima said, confusion creeping into her voice. "Papa always loved them." But her mother had already drifted away, drawn into a conversation with other church mothers, who cast sideways glances at Jemima. The market, once her refuge, became a place of whispered conversations and pitying looks. The other traders, who had watched her grow from a teenager helping in her father's shop to the capable businesswoman she was now, started treating her differently. Mama Tade, who sold vegetables in the stall opposite, no longer called her over to share hot akara during slow afternoons. Even their regular customers seemed hesitant, some choosing to wait for days when Jennifer was manning the shop instead. But the hardest blow came from Blessing, her best friend since secondary school. They had shared everything, from their first crushes to their deepest fears. Blessing had been there when Jemima's father died, sleeping over for weeks to help with the mourning visitors. She had celebrated when Kenneth proposed, helping to pick out the engagement outfit. Now, Blessing's phone went straight to voicemail every time Jemima called. Her messages sat unread, then finally showed double blue ticks but received no response. When they ran into each other at ShopRite, Blessing practically ran down a different aisle, pretending to be on an urgent call. Finally, after weeks of silence, Blessing sent a message. "I think you need help, Ada. The way you're behaving, it's not normal. When you're ready to admit it, maybe we can talk." Jemima read the message 20 times, tears blurring the screen. "What behavior?" she typed back, but Blessing had already blocked her. At home, the isolation followed her like a shadow. Her mother had started suggesting therapy in increasingly urgent tones. "Dr. Mrs. Adebayo is very discreet," Stella would say over breakfast. "Many big people go to her, even that famous pastor's wife." "Mama, I'm fine," Jemima would insist, but she could see the doubt in her mother's eyes. Jennifer, who was home more often now, would shake her head sadly when their mother brought up these concerns. "We're just worried about you, sister," she would say, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "You're not yourself lately. Even Kenneth has noticed." Ah, Kenneth. Her fiancé's growing distance felt like a slow bleeding wound. His calls became shorter, his visits less frequent. When he did come over, he seemed uncomfortable, checking his phone constantly. Once, she reached for his hand during family dinner, and he flinched so slightly that only she noticed. "Work is very busy," he would explain when she asked about his distraction. "End of quarter reports, you know how it is." But Jemima had seen how relaxed he was around Jennifer, laughing at her sister's jokes while barely managing a smile for his fiancée. Only Mama Dunny, their elderly neighbor, seemed to see through the fog of isolation surrounding Jemima. She would invite her over for zobo and chin-chin, listening with wise eyes as Jemima tried to make sense of her crumbling world. "Something is not right in this matter," Mama Dunny said one evening, her old voice firm with conviction. "The Jemima I've known since she was small is not crazy. Open your eyes well, my daughter." But when Mama Dunny tried to speak to Stella, suggesting that someone might be orchestrating Jemima's social downfall, Jennifer was quick to intervene. "Mama Dunny is getting old," she told their mother. "You know how she loves her romance movies. She's seen conspiracies where there are only concerns for Jemima's well-being." The wedding planning became an exercise in humiliation. The committee meetings, once filled with joy and excitement, now felt like trials, where every suggestion Jemima made was met with uncomfortable silence or outright rejection. Perhaps something smaller would be better, the committee head suggested one day, not meeting Jemima's eyes. Less pressure, you understand. At night, alone in her room, Jemima would stare at old photos on her phone, happy moments that now seemed to belong to a different person. Pictures of her and Blessing making funny faces, group photos with church friends who now crossed the road to avoid her, selfies with Kenneth where his smile reached his eyes. She started talking to herself, trying to hold on to her sanity when everyone seemed determined to convince her she was losing it. "I'm not crazy," she would whisper to her reflection. "I'm not imagining things." But in a world where everyone else seemed to see a different reality, even these affirmations began to sound hollow. One evening, she overheard Jennifer on the phone, presumably talking to Cynthia. "It's sad, really. We're all just trying to help her, but you can't help someone who doesn't see they have a problem." Jemima closed her eyes, letting the tears fall silently. The sister who once used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms now spoke about her like she was a stranger, a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be loved. The isolation was complete, a perfectly orchestrated symphony of alienation, where every note had been carefully placed by hands she never suspected would harm her. The cathedral stood magnificent against the Lagos skyline, its stained glass windows catching the morning sun like precious stones. Inside, over 200 guests filled the pews, their colorful outfits creating a tapestry of Ankara and lace. The air conditioning struggled against the heat of bodies and the weight of anticipation, while ushers in matching burgundy outfits guided late arrivals to their seats. In the bridal preparation room, Jemima sat alone before a large mirror, her wedding gown, a masterpiece of white lace and tiny pearls, pooling around her like frozen foam. The makeup artist had done her best to cover the dark circles under her eyes, evidence of countless sleepless nights. The room, meant to be filled with bridesmaids and laughter, echoed with silence. Blessing, who should have been her chief bridesmaid, had declined the role months ago. Outside, Jennifer floated through the crowd in her maid-of-honor dress, accepting compliments on her flawless makeup and the wedding's elegant decoration. Only she knew that her perfectly manicured hands were shaking, that she had already thrown up twice that morning. Cynthia, watching her friend work the crowd, nursed her third glass of champagne, the weight of their shared secrets sitting heavy in her stomach. "You look beautiful," Stella said, entering the bridal room with tears in her eyes. She adjusted Jemima's veil with trembling hands, remembering how she had done the same with her own mother's wrapper on her wedding day. "Your father would be so proud." Jemima forced a smile, thinking of the empty front row seat where her father should have sat. She didn't mention how half the chairs reserved for family friends would likely remain empty, how the crowd had thinned over the months as rumors about her instability spread through their community like Harmattan dust. The ceremony began with hymns that echoed off the cathedral's high ceilings. Jemima walked down the aisle alone, a decision that had raised eyebrows but felt fitting for how isolated she'd become. Her steps were steady, even as she noticed people leaning together, whispering behind their programs. At the altar, Kenneth stood in his perfectly tailored black agbada, his face unreadable. The priest began the service, his voice carrying across the hushed congregation. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." In the front row, Cynthia's hands tightened around her glass, the champagne inside trembling like her conscience. The alcohol had loosened something in her chest, making the practiced lies feel suddenly too heavy to carry. She watched Jennifer standing beside Jemima, playing the perfect sister, and felt bile rise in her throat. The service progressed to the crucial moment. If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause, usually a mere formality, stretched for one heartbeat, then two. "I object," the voice rang out, slightly slurred but clear enough to send gasps rippling through the congregation. Cynthia stood, swaying slightly, her designer gel askew. I can't let this happen." "Cynthia, sit down." Jennifer's harsh whisper carried in the sudden silence, but the champagne and guilt had created a truth too powerful to contain. They'd been lying, Cynthia continued, tears streaming down her face, smearing her expensive makeup. All of it. The text messages, the rumors, the crazy behavior, it was all planned. The congregation erupted in murmurs. Jemima stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Kenneth had gone pale beneath his dark skin. Jennifer and Kenneth, Cynthia's voice broke on the names. They've been having an affair for 2 years. Every rumor about Jemima being unstable, they created them. They manipulated everyone, turned you all against her. The murmurs grew louder. In the front row, Stella pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. The property sale, Cynthia continued, words tumbling out like overripe fruit. Jennifer convinced your mother to sell your father's second shop. She said it was for Jemima's law school, but the money funded their secret meetings, her designer clothes, the hotels. Jemima turned slowly to look at her sister. Jennifer stood rigid, her perfect mask cracking like dry clay in the sun. Their eyes met across the space that had grown between them. No longer just physical distance, but a chasm of betrayal so deep it seemed bottomless. Is it true? Jemima's voice, when it finally came, sounded strange even to her own ears. The silence that followed was answer enough. Kenneth took a step forward, perhaps to explain, but stopped when Jemima raised her hand. All this time, Jemima said, her voice carrying in the hushed church, while I worked double shifts at Papa's shop, while I blamed myself for pushing people away, you were. She couldn't finish. The crowd had become a sea of shocked faces and pointing fingers. Someone started crying, a loud, hiccuping sob that sounded like Mama Dunny. In the back, church elders whispered urgently among themselves. Stella stood up, her legs unsteady. The shop, my husband's shop. You said it was for your sister's future. Jennifer finally moved, reaching for her mother. Mama, I can explain. But Stella stepped back, as if her daughter's touch might burn. The rejection was so clear, so public, that several guests looked away. Jemima looked down at her wedding gown, the dress she had chosen hoping to make everyone proud, to prove she was still the stable, sensible sister they had always known. With deliberate movements, she removed her veil and placed it carefully on the altar. Thank you, Cynthia, she said quietly, for finally telling the truth. Then, without another word, she walked back down the aisle, alone but straight-backed, leaving behind a sister who had chosen desire over devotion, a fiancé who had mistaken admiration for love, and 200 witnesses to the unraveling of a family's carefully constructed facade. As she reached the church doors, the sunlight hit her face, harsh and bright and real. Behind her, the whispers had grown to a roar, but for the first time in months, the noise of others' opinions couldn't touch her. The truth, even wrapped in pain, had finally set her free. 5 years passed like a slow river, carrying away the pieces of what was once a close-knit family. The scandal of the wedding that never was had become a cautionary tale in their Lagos community, whispered about at other weddings, referenced in church sermons about loyalty and truth. Stella's depression settled into their home like a heavy, invisible guest. The vibrant woman, who once commanded respect as a banker's wife, then earned admiration as a resilient widow, now barely left her bedroom. The weight of her own role in the betrayal, selling her late husband's property based on Jennifer's manipulation, bent her shoulders and dimmed her eyes. Her silver hair, once carefully dyed black, grew out untouched, a visible sign of her surrender to grief. Every morning, she would sit at her small writing desk and pen another letter to Jemima, pouring out her regret, her love, her desperate need for forgiveness. The letters joined dozens of others in a carved wooden box, all returned unopened. The Abuja address marked recipient unknown in red ink. Still she wrote, as if the act itself might somehow bridge the distance between her and her firstborn. Jennifer remained in Lagos, but the city that once felt like her playground had become a prison of whispers and turned backs. The same church women who had believed her lies now crossed the street to avoid her. Her fashionable clothes and designer bags gathered dust in her closet, unworn reminders of what her betrayal had cost. She took over their father's original shop, but customers were few. Many preferred to walk further to other stores rather than buy from the sister who had destroyed her family. Kenneth, the man for whom she had sacrificed everything, disappeared from her life within months of the wedding scandal. The bank had quietly transferred him to their Kano branch, away from the gossip that threatened to tarnish their corporate image. His last message to her had been brief. Some things, once broken, cannot be fixed. But it was in Abuja that the story found its bittersweet resolution. Jemima, who had left Lagos with nothing but a small bag and her law school acceptance letter, rebuilt herself from the ashes of betrayal. The newspaper article that found its way to Stella's trembling hands showed her daughter standing proud in legal robes, described as a rising star in family law, specializing in cases of domestic abuse and betrayal. Barrister Jemima Stephen, the article read, attributes her passion for protecting vulnerable family members to personal experience. Sometimes she was quoted saying, "The deepest wounds come from those closest to us. My job is to help heal those wounds through justice." When Jennifer saw the same article in a customer's newspaper, she touched her sister's photo with longing, noticing how Jemima's smile had changed, still beautiful, but harder, more guarded. The successful woman in the photograph was a stranger who shared her blood but no longer her life. Sometimes, in Abuja's busy streets, Jemima would glimpse someone who reminded her of Jennifer. A certain way of walking, a familiar laugh, and her heart would stutter before remembering. These moments came less frequently now, but they never stopped completely. She had learned that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying the scars with grace. The elderly Mama Dunny, who still lived next door to Stella, would sometimes sit with her friend in the evenings, sharing tea and silence. "Family," she would say, shaking her head slowly, "is like a mirror. Once broken, you can try to piece it together, but the cracks will always show." The final irony came in the form of their father's lucky white shirt, still hanging in Stella's closet. The shirt that had witnessed their happiest family moments now stood as a silent reminder of how far they had fallen. Sometimes, late at night, Stella would touch its worn fabric and remember a time when her daughters were small enough to sit on their father's lap together, their laughter filling the house like music. But some broken things stay broken, their sharp edges serving as reminders that trust, once shattered, leaves cuts too deep to heal completely. The sisters lived in the same city again, but the distance between them was measured not in kilometers, but in betrayals, lies, and the heavy silence of things that could never be unsaid. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap on the notification bell for more interesting stories like this one. Goodbye.